think the progressives who we like to encounter are confident that without the state, without the progressive state, the welfare state, the surveillance state, the regulatory state, there will be much evil across the land. And so we need to continue having faith in it as our guarantor and our hope. This is David Tulis, and I'm a dissenter from this this orthodoxy that is so pervasive, especially at UTC, and especially among younger people who are convinced that socialism has much to offer, much gain. It just hasn't had a chance really to work yet. We just need to give it maybe some more funding and a little bit more respect, and be patient to it. Without that, they say there is only anarchy. There's danger all around. There are women who will be unable to breastfeed. There will be families sitting around tables with no food to put on the main plastic dish there in the middle, and no gas to run the stove to cook it. That last can of ravioli, the large family-sized can of ravioli there that's got the top peeled open and looking like a hatch door on a submarine there on the counter. They can't cook it because there's no gas on the stove. Without socialism, without the progressive theory, we will have scenes like that in nearly every household. Well, I'm a progressive liberal. I like saying that in not a progressive liberal, a classical liberal. I like saying that because it throws people off their guard, especially if they're on the left. And I was at the Ottawa Farmers Market yesterday. It's every Thursday behind the Ottawa, let's see, the plant shop there, the nursery business. And I told that to one woman, and she shocked and recoiled. She leaped away from me and said, "Ooh, you're one of those." And I hastened to explain what that meant. I said, "Well, I'm in the tradition of Bastiat and de Tocqueville. Have you not read those? Have you read von Mises or any of the Austrians?" And she hadn't, but she wasn't quite sure I was worth being within 20 feet from. Otherwise, I might bite her. But even people on the right don't understand what I'm saying, and on the left, they don't understand it either, because they think that I'm their friend and their ally. In some things, the left is right. I think we have our progressive left here in Chattanooga is right on several important points, namely that skepticism, which was aired this past week regarding the chief of police prospect David Roddy, who is the armed cop, the cop with the armor, the cop with the helmet, the visor, and whose operation is extremely, well, if not extremely, at least increasingly militaristic in its orientation, converting the 480 sworn officer force of Chattanooga into more of a standing army of occupation, serving Mayor Burke, right? Because the mayor has this standing army. It serves him with the complicity of the city council. So on that front, we are waiting word on his choice. There are three candidates: Mr. McPherson, Mr. Roddy, and then a third candidate from LAPD, a very violent military organization, which is the home of the SWAT team. The SWAT team had its origins in Los Angeles as policing finally came to its own, came to be self-aware, right? Just like artificial intelligence is self-aware and can even write its own language. Police are self-aware and have written their own language. There's a story that is worth noting about Lookout Mountain considering an ordinance on Airbnb short-term vacation rentals. And what's interesting is the way the lead is by Gail Perry at Chattanooga.com. She says a proposed ordinance to legalize home sharing was reviewed. Well, it's already legal, right? But what happens when you have a story like this is that something that is presumed to be illegal is made to be legal. But what's happened is whenever you create an ordinance or a licensing scheme, you are declaring something illegal. And then you are allowing the participants to enter into that field by permission, right? By permission and agreeing to conditions. And here in Lookout Mountain, Georgia, one of the conditions is you sign an affidavit swearing that you will, or vowing that you will agree to all the rules, which include this: if you have a short-term vacation rental room or part of your house available to visitors to Chattanooga area, that you have to be there the whole time. You can't have more than 3 people per bedroom, or a total of 6 people in the house that you won't serve food or alcohol. That you have to get a business license and a home sharing permit. That you have to pay the hotel motel tax of the city. There can't be signs. There has to be adequate parking for no more than 2 vehicles. And the story by Gail Perry tells about a permitting process that has the city review your affidavit, review your name, and find out who you are, and the city will issue no more than 15 permits. She reports a sunset clause will apply, so that the city council must choose to renew the ordinance allowing the short-term rentals beyond the first year. So in other words, the law will sunset and suddenly it'll be illegal again, we are to presume. However, constitutional government doesn't work that way. Free enterprise doesn't work that way. And though I'm really not as familiar with Georgia statutes as I am with Tennessee's, I would suspect that the whole thing is a ruse. It is a ruse for the city to say, well, if we don't allow it, it's illegal. Well, no. If you own your home in, I would say, every state in the country, if you own your home and are not a corporation, but an individual, a human being, a man or a woman, right, a soul with a body that's either of the male sex or the female sex, a human being in your proper person, right, in your persona propria, as the law would say in Latin, then you have a right to do whatever you want with your house, so long it creates no tortious conduct and it emanates no wrongs or torts against neighbors. You are free to do with your house as you want. Now, if you're a corporation running that house as a rental property, then I would say that there's not as much liberty, and that is because the corporation, which is a creature of the state, has to serve the state at every turn. It has to serve public policy, and so it's not free. The status of the owner matters, I would suggest, and if the status of the owner of a house in Lookout Mountain, Georgia, is an individual, then he should assume that he is free to do what he wants with that property, so long that there is no tort that flies out from it, no wrong of which a neighbor can complain and could complain in court. Right, the level of damage has to be one which would say this is bad enough to sue over. Right, if it becomes that bad, well, guess what? The court is open. Courts are open for remedying disagreements and wrongs among neighbors and business associates. And so there you go. But you have to have something that's provably wrong, right? That a jury would be led to understand by the arguments of the facts that this is a wrong against you, the neighbor of the short-term vacation rental house. And those conditions in a private relationship, a home rented out, a house rented out by a private party, are hardly possible to be met. That's why the regulatory society is really very evil, because it presupposes a wrong at every turn. It makes it wrong to do something that's innocent and harmless, and presupposes that the practitioner has to be prevented by the rules, of course, from entering into that state of being careless and damaging to the neighbor. And usually that's not what happens. Of course, there are always exceptions, but we don't want to, we might say, legislate based on on the exception. But that's often what happens in Lookout Mountain, Georgia. Proposing this ordinance is misreading and misrepresenting the rights of people such as, I believe, Michelle Peterson, who is an investor and a renter, and who told me that she's very concerned about the abuse of her rights of property, her personal, individual woman rights of property ownership. Right, that is something in view here. The big story of the week has been here in Chattanooga, the TVA police surveillance story. It is a development that has been reported only here, and simply because I'm working on another story. This is a sidebar to the main story that I'm afraid I'm getting behind on the necessity, by virtue of the necessities of being a businessman. David Tulis here at Nooga Radio, pursuing sales calls, as I'm a salesman as well as journalist, and your host here every morning at AM 1240 and FM 92.7. My main story is the unmarked car analysis, and I've half written it, and I've been doing research on it. And Phil Noblett at the city attorney's office says he's going to get back to me. I guess I just need to, when I can find time on my calendar, say I'd like to have an interview about the authority claimed by the city to run unmarked police cars in commercial transportation stops, which is to say traffic stops by unmarked cars that are not clearly in service to the public interest, but are secret and disguised, and I would say they're not permitted because there's no explicit grant of authority for that to happen. So that's you might say the challenge of my question. The slow man question is always, what is your authority? And I don't know what that authority is, and yet it seems to be presumptively operative somewhere, having its source in some rule or explicit grant. I say this is an issue, and that the TVA story is a sidebar, because the TVA spokesman Scott Fiedler could have simply said, "Well, you asked what the authority is of TVA cops running traffic patrol. Well, it's in the Tennessee Code. Don't you know the code?" And of course, the question is, "Well, no, I don't know the code. Please cite it for me." And he didn't. He just said, "Well, we're federal, and therefore we don't really have to worry about the things that concern you. What statutory authority? What is that to us? We are federal people." He could have said, "Well, it's allowed in Tennessee law." Even though my initial reporting on that did undergo a revision, in which I first reported the statute skeptically, as if it were a loophole, and then I revised my analysis to say, well, indeed, it's an explicit grant. And even though in the initial story I said the appeal for this not to happen is to TVA's main calling in its charter. How is it that mission creep has now allowed TVA to enforce traffic rules under the Tennessee Code Title 55? That's where that's enforced. How is TVA? How is its security enhanced by a woman with a wrong tag on the back of her car, on her plate, mismatching her car? How is that a TVA interest to enforce that? And that's the story that was published Sunday, which is to say 5 days ago, now at Nooganomics.com, first published at Nooganomics.com, the website for the Man Who Matters. Not a popular website, right? Because it deals with high-profile and important issues such as these rights and the free market. And that's the biggest story this week, is the policing story. Again, a sidebar to the main question, and that is the authority of city police in Chattanooga and other agencies. I want to say these unmarked cars may be from other agencies that I've seen. They may not be CPD. They may have been TVA stops, but we need to find out more about that. Now, you, my listener, are the man I'm glad is there. But listen, let's work together on these projects. You report, and the world decides. 800-8949. 800-8949 is my number. You report, and the world decides. Look, send me some video, right? Give me a report. I'm a very empathetic ear to stories of distress. Private distress, maybe distress by the state against you, certainly. Want to hear about that. And the reason I'm concerned about these abuses of state power is that they tend to have a negative effect on prosperity. They diminish the virile nature of the man. They diminish his confidence in himself and what he has to do, and they make it more difficult to start a business. If you live in a city where there is widespread disrespect of private property rights, including the right of travel and locomotion, because the blue lights are on your roof or the blue lights are on your dash, and you are going to be busy today, that is a negative effect on the marketplace. It is a depressing, suppressive effect on the capitalistic instinct. And the reason I say that is because whenever you have uncertainty in law, whenever you have oppressive law, people who are entrepreneurially minded become timid, right? They become hesitant. They hesitate to invest. They hesitate to make commitments. They hesitate to say, all right, I think I can hire you because I think I can generate cash flow in my business to afford you on payroll 3 months out. I don't want to hire you if I feel like I have to fire you within a month because I'm not getting cash flow. But people who are in that situation where there's the whole risk of the business is on you, they become scared. A traffic stop an uncalled for traffic stop, an uncalled for citation, an uncalled for private harassment of a private person by a state actor is extraordinarily inhibitive of the entrepreneurial instinct, because again, it suggests the uncertainty of law. Law has to be certain, and we need to have people who are not intimidated. And I think probably the best and sharpest entrepreneurs in Chattanooga probably are members of gangs. And I say that I have an essay about this. I'm thinking about publishing regarding these young men who are black. They're young. They're highly socially oriented. They're very self-seeking, which is a problem. I say it's part of the sin problem. But they also are. They know how the system works. And if we can get them to invest, if we can get them to have an investment in law and order, they can see that the law really does protect them from police harassment, and they can stand their ground on the Constitution and see that in that system of constitutional government, where the state is restrained by law, they can have their own enterprises and serve others. And that's a long process, of course. That comes from the gospel having its effect on individual lives, where deacons and Christian men encourage these young men to turn from gang affiliation, to turn from self-seeking, the play of guns, sex, gasoline, power, and night rooms filled with gambling and miscreancy. Those are things that draw young men into a world of identification and meaning and purpose. Can they be turned away from that? Well, maybe, but it takes something. It takes a positive ethic. And I would say that the gospel, where the love of the Lord Jesus upon sinful men is offered, that is a very powerful inducement. Now, my time has escaped me here. I'm just trying to get the roundup in, but at some point today, if God gives me grace, we can ask our guests about this the Chamber of Commerce theory of marketplace development. And the Chamber of Commerce model is, I'd say, largely disastrous because it overlooks local economy and the free money. It's always counting on, especially at the Chattanooga Chamber of Commerce Foundation, it's always looking for outside money. Bring outside money here, build a factory, and create new groups of employees. Now, employees are not people who are prospering. They're simply employed, right? They're paid what they're worth. An employee does not have profit. Employee does not show a profit, does not show a gain, and that's because he's paid exactly what he's worth. It's when you own the business, own the factory, own the service, that you make a profit. The profit is the cream of prosperity, right? The profit is what makes a business survivable and sustainable, and it what makes a city sustainable. If we don't have profit, we don't have prosperity. The chamber model is bring in outside money, jobs, and tourism. Follow the money, right? And this though, that model is an unstable and unpredictable local economy. The more big players you have, if you don't have a lot of small players, which is, I think, is much better for health and prosperity. Many small players, but maybe not quite as many small, medium level players. That is a healthy local economy, rather than a Volkswagen coming in and hiring 2,000 people and investing, getting $1 billion in tax breaks, and investing a couple $1 billion in a new factory and a lot of pavement. I think we need, of course, casinos are the worst of the tourism model. We're not having casinos here as they have in Biloxi, where the local people, the local restaurants are all forced either to close their businesses and work, making beds and serving martinis in these giant companies with their glittering casinos that export the profit. What we're concerned about here on the David Tulis Show is the export of profit. Now, I have a chart, and the chart has, on the left side we have a free economy, a local economy. On the right side we have what Charles Hugh Smith and other writers call the plantation economy, and I'm going to get to that at some point. And we have a conversation in just a minute with the only candidate for governor of Tennessee who has, I think, the right view of the need for a restrained state, a restrained state government, which has in decades past, since at least 1936, become a form of commercial government, a skimming economy, a government that strip mines the people of their rights and harasses them, collecting billions of dollars in fines and fees and licenses. I'd say much of it outside of actual authority in the state, where we have government and then we have the state. My concern is that the state has grown beyond where the Constitution allows the government to be. That is a grave problem. So how do we have prosperity in Chattanooga, Helmand County? How do you have prosperity in your neck of the woods, assuming you are just traveling here or traveling through here or visiting? We do thank you. David Tulis here with just a couple minutes of your time talking about local economy and free markets, live on TuneIn Radio. TuneIn Radio, the app, live on Noogaradio.com. David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader, Nooga.